The courtroom was quiet. Just another cold morning on the docket. A homeless man shuffled in, wrists shackled, eyes downcast, jacket torn, name forgotten. Most saw just another vagrant. Another case number. Another burden on the system. But when he said his name, Mason Quinn, the air changed. The judge froze. His grip tightened. That name, it belonged to the Marine who had saved his younger brother in Fallujah 2 decades ago. The same man who had vanished after the war. The same brother whose grave he still visits every winter. And now here stood that same Marine, not honored, not remembered, but arrested. For loitering behind a cafe, just trying to survive the night. How does a warrior fade from memory? How does a man go from saving lives to begging for one more hour of warmth? What happened in that courtroom wasn't law. It was justice. And it would bring a room full of men to their feet. If you believe no brother in arms should ever be forgotten, hit like, subscribe, and share. These are the stories they never teach in school. True stories of brotherhood, sacrifice, and silent strength. Let's keep their names alive. Let's remind the world what real honor looks like. The courtroom smelled like rusted heat vents and cold metal. The kind of place where men's stories get reduced to numbers and faces blur into files. Nobody looked up when the next case was called. A man in cuffs entered, bent forward, shoulders caved. Military jacket 2 sizes too large. Each step echoed like it was dragging 20 years behind it. Docket 47B, the bailiff called out, voice sharp. City versus Mason Quinn. The man raised his head slowly. One eye swollen, beard unkempt. Mason Quinn, he said. The clerk froze. The pen in his hand paused mid-stroke. Up on the bench, the judge stopped reading. Not because the voice was loud, but because the name was familiar, heavy, ghost-like. The judge stared across the courtroom. Something about that name cracked through his discipline like a round through drywall. He reached for the case file, flipped the cover open, and scanned. But his hands had started to tremble. His jaw clenched. Across the years, across oceans and war zones, the name Mason Quinn had survived. It wasn't just a defendant. It was a memory made flesh. Mason kept his head down. Didn't see the judge's hands. Didn't recognize the tension. He'd stopped expecting anyone to remember him years ago. In this place, he wasn't a Marine. He was a vagrant, a problem. Another cold man pulled from behind a kitchen just trying not to die that night. The prosecutor stood, young, clean, confident. The defendant has repeatedly loitered behind the Jefferson Street Cafe. This is his 3rd citation this year. He sounded proud of his efficiency, probably polished that speech in a mirror. He didn't mention that Mason never begged, never shouted, never threatened anyone. Just sat in the alley, eating what the cook passed him through the back door. Officer Davis approached the stand next, a beat cop. Marine haircut. Didn't meet Mason's eyes. Found him around 11:45 p.m. I asked him to leave. He refused. Mason didn't argue. He had back then. Asked for 5 minutes to finish a half sandwich. Told the officer it was his only hot meal that day. But tonight, silence felt easier than dignity. That's what life had taught him. His boots were military issue, worn down to the soles. His knuckles were split from the cold. He carried himself like a man who had been strong once, like a man who had led others through things no human should endure. But arthritis and time had made every motion stiff. Everything looked like it hurt. But pain didn't stop Marines. They just learned to walk with it. Mr. Quinn, the judge said, voice controlled. Do you have representation? Mason shook his head. His assigned public defender had been pulled to another hearing 2 hours ago. There hadn't been time to reschedule. There's never time for men like him. Would you like to speak on your own behalf? The judge asked. His voice was neutral, but something beneath it was. Off, quieter, personal. Mason cleared his throat. That old gravelly sound. No excuses, Your Honor, he said. Just trying to stay warm. He didn't flinch. Didn't ramble. His words were stripped down to survival. Any reason you picked that particular alley? The judge asked, pen poised. Mason hesitated. Cook knows me. Jimmy. His old man served with me in Desert Storm. Sometimes he passes me scraps. Just food. That's all. The judge looked up. And your service record? Mason blinked. No one had asked that in years. United States Marine Corps, 75 to 95. Staff Sergeant. 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, Iraq, Afghanistan. The words came back like muscle memory, like a boot hitting gravel. A flicker passed across the judge's face, almost like he was remembering something. Something not from the file, but from his life. Then the courtroom doors opened. Heavy oak swung on squeaky hinges. A man in a charcoal suit stepped inside, straight-backed, briefcase in hand. He walked with quiet command. Confidence of a man used to rooms of power. "Your Honor," he said. Alexander Maddox, retained counsel for Mr. Quinn. The judge's brow furrowed. This court wasn't notified of representation. "A recent development," Maddox said smoothly. "I request a brief recess." Mason looked up at the stranger beside him. "I don't know you," he whispered. "Didn't hire anyone." Maddox replied just loud enough for Mason to hear. "You didn't have to." He set the briefcase down with purpose. "The firm of Maddox, Reese & Palmer is handling your case pro bono." Mason squinted. "Palmer? Like the judge?" Maddox gave a nod. "Exactly like the judge." The judge stared at Mason. His hands, which had stopped trembling, tightened once more. "The court will recess for 15 minutes. He stood quickly and disappeared into his chambers. The bailiff called order. The gavel hit wood. But no one breathed until the door shut behind the judge. Mason sat still, confused. Everything had just changed, and he didn't yet know why. Inside chambers, the judge sat at his desk. He pulled out a worn folder from the bottom drawer. Inside was a photograph. Him and his younger brother, Kyle, fresh out of the academy. Smiling, arms around each other in dress blues. Behind the frame, a letter. Thin, creased, touched too many times. Kyle's last words home from Iraq, the firefight in Fallujah, the pinned convoy, the wounded, and the Marine who dragged Kyle out under fire. "Mason Quinn," the judge whispered. "It's him." The name that had haunted his memories for 2 decades. The man whose face he'd never seen, but whose actions had lived in his family like legend. The one who saved Kyle so others could make it home. Kyle didn't. He died 2 weeks later. But Mason Quinn gave them extra days. And that mattered. A knock on the judge's door. Maddox entered. "You sure it's him?" The judge nodded. 2nd Battalion, April 17, 2004. Same unit. Same operation. Maddox opened his briefcase, pulled out a printed report. He's been off the grid for years. V record stalled. PTSD flagged. Wife left. Job loss. No address since 2013. He just disappeared. Until now. The judge rubbed his jaw. "I tried to find him." Maddox closed the folder. "You could recuse yourself." The judge shook his head. "No, this man carried my brother through hell. I owe him more than silence." The gavel he once used to dismiss lives now felt too small for what needed to be done. "I won't turn away this time." He stood alone for too long. The courtroom returned to order. Mason sat straighter now, though he didn't know why. Alexander Maddox leaned in. "They know who you are now," he said quietly. Mason frowned. "I'm just a washed-up grunt." Maddox shook his head. "Not to him." The judge re-entered. His face was calm, but his eyes had seen ghosts. He took his seat and cleared his throat. "Mr. Maddox," the judge began formally, "has your client decided how to proceed?" Maddox stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We request dismissal." The defendant was merely seeking warmth in dangerous conditions. He had implied permission from cafe staff. The prosecutor began to object. The judge raised a single hand. "Before ruling, I have questions for the defendant. Questions not in this file, but in memory." He turned to Mason. "Mr. Quinn, your file says you served in Fallujah, 2004. That accurate?" Mason nodded. "Yes, sir. 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. And on April 17th of that year? The judge asked, voice steady. Mason paused. We were escorting a convoy outside the city. Got hit hard. Lost half the lead vehicle before we even returned fire. During that engagement, the judge continued, his hands now clenched around the bench edge, did you assist a wounded lieutenant under fire? Mason's jaw locked. His eyes stared into nothing. Yes, sir. He was down. Tried to reach a corpsman. Took 2 hits. I dragged him back behind cover. Gave suppressive fire so the rest could evacuate. He told me to leave him. I didn't. A man in the back row stood. Gray-haired, tight haircut. Marine League jacket across his chest. I was there, he said, voice breaking. That's him. Staff Sergeant Quinn. He saved us. Pulled us back. Carried Parker out like he was nothing but weight. The judge's hands tightened. He didn't ask for silence. Didn't bang the gavel. That moment deserved space. Mason shifted in his seat, uncomfortable under the weight of recognition. Lieutenant Parker, he whispered, young guy. Too brave for his own good. I still see his face sometimes. Heard he didn't make it back from the next op. I always wondered if I just bought him time or bought him pain. His voice cracked at the edges. He looked down again. The judge leaned forward. That lieutenant was my brother. The words dropped like a stone in the center of the room. Mason's head snapped up. Kyle? He asked, disbelief ripping through his voice. The judge nodded once. Kyle Palmer. That firefight changed everything. You gave us time with him we never would have had. And for 20 years, I've wanted to thank you. Mason stared, stunned. The room blurred. I never knew what happened to him after Germany. The judge replied, he made it to Ramsden, wrote us letters, told us about you, called you the kind of Marine he hoped to become. Then 2 weeks later, he was gone. The judge's voice never rose, but every man in the room heard it shake. A murmur ran through the gallery. The judge cleared his throat and motioned to the bailiff. Bring them in. The side door opened. 3 Marines entered in uniform. 1 colonel, 1 gunnery sergeant, 1 corporal carrying a polished wooden box. Mason stood instinctively, back straight, eyes front. He didn't even realize he'd done it. It just came back like breathing. The judge removed his glasses and set them down. For the record, I must disclose my personal connection to this case, he said. The man this defendant saved was my brother. The Corps confirmed Mr. Quinn's actions matched the commendations filed in 2004. His silver star was awarded in classified conditions. New intel has surfaced. He nodded to the colonel. Staff Sergeant Mason J. Quinn, the colonel announced, stepping forward. By order of the Secretary of the Navy, in recognition of gallantry and intrepidity in combat on April 17, 2004, your Silver Star has been upgraded. The corporal opened the box. Inside gleamed the Navy Cross. The room fell silent. Only the breath of grown men filled the air like wind through pine. Mason blinked, chest rising. There's some mistake, he said, voice dry. I was just doing my job. The colonel stepped forward. No mistake, Sergeant. You disrupted an ambush, saved 6 Marines, and altered the course of that convoy. For 20 years, your record was buried under clearance. It's time the world knew. He looked over the gallery. This is what a Marine looks like. From the back of the room, the older Marine snapped to attention. Attention on deck, he bellowed. Uniformed men in the gallery rose first, then others, former soldiers, cops, court staff. Even the prosecutor stood, not from law, but from respect. They faced Mason, saluted, quiet, still. No clapping, no ceremony. Just brothers standing tall for one who never asked them to. The judge's voice cracked slightly. In light of these circumstances, all charges against Staff Sergeant Mason Quinn are dismissed with prejudice. The gavel came down. Once. Clean. Final. He stepped from the bench, no longer just a judge, but a man returning a debt. Mr. Quinn, I believe we have matters to discuss beyond this courtroom, the kind that should have been handled years ago. Mason stood straighter now, shoulders square. The weight didn't vanish, but it lifted enough for breath. Maddox approached. We've begun processing your back pay, full VA medical, housing, and retirement benefits. You're owed more than money, but this is a start, and I'll see it through myself. Mason didn't speak. He just nodded once, like a Marine receiving orders. The gunnery sergeant stepped forward. We've also recovered your medals, Sergeant. Purple Hearts. Bronze Star. We'll get him framed properly. You earn every one. Mason stared down into the case. He hadn't seen those medals since his storage unit was auctioned off 5 winters ago. It looked like someone else's life. Someone who used to matter. In the corner of the room, Jimmy, the cafe cook, approached slowly. My old man served with you in Desert Storm, he said. Always told me if I ever met a Mason Quinn, I owed him everything. I just never realized you were the guy behind my kitchen. His voice cracked. Thank you. For everything. They shook hands, soldier to soldier. The prosecutor walked over. His eyes didn't dodge. I had no idea who you were, Sergeant, he said. I was wrong, and I apologize for how this was handled. Mason looked him in the eye. It's not about me, he said. It's about the others still out there, on sidewalks, in shelters, forgotten. The prosecutor nodded slowly. Maybe we both have work to do. The judge returned, now without his robe. You told my brother something once, he said. He wrote it in his last letter. Mason tilted his head. The judge looked him in the eye. No Marine gets left behind while I'm breathing, Mason nodded. That's what I believed. Still do. The judge placed a hand on his shoulder. Today, we finally returned the promise. The apartment was small, almost bare. A table, a chair, a cot, and a duffel that hadn't been opened in years. Mason Quinn stood in the doorway like a man released from prison, but not yet ready to walk free. The floor didn't creak. The air was clean. For the first time in decades, he was indoors without fear of being chased off. He hadn't asked for this place. Maddox's firm made the calls. Some veterans' housing initiative with emergency prioritization for special cases. They moved fast once the truth came out. But Mason hadn't moved fast in years. Everything he did now was slow. Eating, walking, remembering. Especially remembering. That part came in waves and never asked for permission. He set the Navy Cross on the table. Didn't hang it. Just looked at it. Touched the edge with calloused fingers. Some men built lives around medals. Mason didn't even keep his original set. They'd been packed into a box years ago, lost to auction when he missed 3 months of storage payments. Those medals had once meant something. Then, they meant nothing. He'd worn dress blues once. Iron, crisp, like armor made of respect. They didn't feel like his anymore. Honor fades when it's not fed. When the calls stop. When the letters vanish. When your service gets stamped and filed away. The medals couldn't shield him from war after war. Not the ones overseas. And not the ones inside his own skull. The first war carved his bones. The second broke them. Desert Storm made him a leader. Fallujah made him a ghost. He remembered every face he couldn't save. Every footstep that echoed too loud. Every wall that came down with someone behind it. He remembered yelling orders and not hearing his own voice. Remembered blood he couldn't wash off for days. PTSD came like fog. It didn't announce itself. Didn't ask permission. It just showed up one day, sat beside him on a city bench, and never left. Sleep left first. Rage came next. His brothers tried. A few checked in. Then deployments moved them. Promotion swallowed them. Time erased their numbers. Soon, he became the one who was too hard to reach. He had a brother once. Blood. Same father, same house, same tough knuckles from the old man's backhand. His brother had been a fireman. Died on the job. Smoke inhalation. Mason hadn't gone to the funeral. Not because he didn't care, but because he couldn't walk into a room full of uniforms without seeing coffins. Some kinds of guilt feel like cowardice. He used to keep photos in his wallet. Squad photos. Guys from different eras, different wars. Men who would have taken a bullet for him without blinking. Most of them gone now. Not to bullets, but to bottles, bridges, pills, or just silence. Men who'd face fire without flinching, but couldn't face empty apartments or broken marriages when they came home. His marriage ended during his third deployment. No drama. Just distance. One letter said, "I'm tired of sleeping next to your ghost." That was the last thing she wrote. Mason didn't blame her. He wouldn't have stayed with himself either. There was a time he couldn't look in the mirror without seeing Fallujah reflected back. Couldn't speak without hearing the screaming. After the military, he worked construction. Rooftops, scaffolding, long hours under the sun. It felt honest, physical, like penance with a paycheck. But his knee gave out on a 2-story fall. VA claimed his injuries weren't service-connected. He appealed, filled forms, stood in line for hours, and still got denied. That was the moment he stopped asking for help. No one came. Shelters came next. Not all bad, not all good. Just places to survive the cold. Some were run by vets who understood the silence. Others were managed by people who stared at you like you were broken glass. He learned which churches fed the cleanest meals. Learned which bus stops you wouldn't get moved from. Learned that dignity had a price. The court hearing that changed everything. But it also broke something. He hadn't cried since '99, but when the gallery rose to salute, something cracked deep. Not from shame, from recognition. After 2 decades of blending into alleys and steam vents, someone finally saw the Marine again. Not the man who smelled like cigarette ash. The man who carried brothers through hell. The next morning, a knock came at the apartment door. It was Maddox, carrying a tablet, papers, and an old cigar box. "Storage unit in Pittsburgh," he said. "Found your medals. And this." Inside the box were dog tags, a letter from command, and a folded piece of canvas, a piece of the old unit's flag. Mason stared like it was a ghost. He sat down slowly, held the fabric between his fingers. "I thought this was burned," Maddox nodded. "The fire hit the barracks, yeah, but someone grabbed it. Said you'd want it someday." Mason exhaled through his nose. They thought wrong. But he didn't put it down. Just sat there, holding it like a man remembering something too heavy to speak out loud. Maddox didn't talk much after that. He understood the silence. Not a veteran himself, but close enough to feel the gravity. He left after setting the papers on the table. "You've got a VA evaluation next week. Medical team already flagged your case for priority. Full coverage. Back pay. Housing. All of it's real now." Mason nodded slowly. Took long enough. He spent that night sitting at the window, watching traffic, hearing nothing. The city still sounded like artillery in the distance. Brakes hissed like mortar. Sirens flashed like red tracers. Some nights were better. Some weren't. That's the part no one tells you. War doesn't end. It just comes home with you and finds new places to hide. There was a neighbor upstairs, young guy, also a vet. Lost his leg in Kandahar. They hadn't spoken yet. Just nodded, passing each other in the hallway. Mason had seen the brace. Noticed the eyes. That same look like your back, but only on paper. They didn't need words. You can see it in posture, in how long a man holds a stare. Mason started writing again. Nothing dramatic. Just field notes, like he used to write after patrols. He wrote names he remembered, dates, coordinates. Sometimes he couldn't stop his hand from shaking, but he kept going, one page at a time. Not because he wanted anyone to read it, but because for once, his memories needed somewhere to go besides his spine. He opened the VA envelope. Inside were forms for therapy, for housing allowance, for mental health support. He read every line, didn't toss them out like he used to. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because of the courtroom, or the uniform salute, or the judge who finally spoke like a man who owed him something. Maybe Mason just wanted to feel seen again. The Navy Cross remained on the table, still not hung, still not mounted. It wasn't humility. It wasn't shame. It was something else, something deeper, That medal wasn't about pride. It was about weight. Every man who didn't come back lived inside that blue ribbon. And Mason knew deep down that accepting it meant carrying their silence too. The next morning, Mason woke before the sun. Still a habit. Decades of pre-dawn firewatch. He moved slow but precise. Made black coffee like he used to in the field. Bitter, strong, no sugar. He sat in the chair near the window. Same chair. Same silence. But today the quiet didn't bite as hard. It was still, but not empty. There was a knock at the door. Not loud. Not hesitant either. Just 3 short taps. Military rhythm. Mason opened it to find the guy from upstairs. Lean frame, prosthetic leg, shaved head. Name's Cole, he said. Saw you in court. Mason nodded. I figured. Cole didn't ask to come in. Just handed over a folded paper. You're not forgotten. Inside the paper was a flyer. A local gathering for combat veterans. Coffee, cards, no speeches, no counselors. Just chairs and silence if needed. Mason raised an eyebrow. You go? Cole shrugged. Sometimes. Not because I need it. Because they might. Mason tucked the flyer on the table. He didn't commit. But he didn't toss it either. That mattered more than he admitted. Later that afternoon, Mason took a walk. Streets hadn't changed much. Same bus routes. Same broken benches. He passed the alley behind the cafe. Stopped for a moment. Steam still poured from the kitchen vent. Familiar. He could almost see himself, huddled near it. Same spot, same smell. Only now he wasn't invisible. He was someone again. A man with a name. Jimmy stepped out from the back door, wiping his hands. Heard you were back on your feet, he said, grinning. Should have known sooner, Mason shrugged. Didn't even know myself. Jimmy reached into his apron and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in foil. Have it, he said, offering it. Mason didn't decline. Thanks. They sat on overturned milk crates, just like the old days. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Just 2 men sharing silence, wrapped in mutual respect. After a while, Jimmy said, My old man told me stories about you. Always said if I ever met Quinn, I owed him. Mason shook his head. No one owes me anything. Jimmy paused. Yeah, but some of us still remember. That's gotta count. Mason walked back as the sky turned orange. Street lights flickered on. He passed other men on benches, wrapped in donated coats, heads down. He saw one man with a cardboard sign that read, Still proud. Just cold. Mason didn't say anything, but it hit him harder than any insult ever could. That phrase stayed with him all night. Just cold. He opened his field notes again, wrote that line down. Still proud, just cold. It summed up everything he carried. Not anger, not entitlement. Just that, a quiet pride buried under years of freezing wind and forgotten birthdays. It made him think of every Marine who disappeared into civilian shadows. Not because they failed, but because the country forgot how to look. That night, Mason sat on the floor, back against the wall. The Navy Cross still untouched. His knees ached. But he didn't lie down. Just stared at the medal and thought about the firefight again. The sand, the screaming, the lieutenant's face. The weight of another man's gear as he dragged him across a kill zone. Those seconds still looped endlessly. He remembered the way Kyle Palmer had looked at him, bleeding, scared but calm. Get the others first, he had said. Mason ignored the order, pulled him anyway. Took a round in the hip doing it. Could have left him. Should have maybe. But that's not what Marines do. That's not what he was trained to do. One team. No exceptions. That memory was both his pride and his punishment. He saved the man only to learn he died 2 weeks later. That knowledge nearly destroyed him. It made every medal feel like mockery. For years, he thought his courage had been a delay, not salvation. But after court, after hearing the judge's words, something in that story shifted inside him. He learned Kyle had written home, talked about Mason, called him the kind of leader he hoped to become. That truth, just that one fact, gave Mason something he hadn't felt in decades. Not pride, not peace. Something simpler, worth. He mattered even if just for a few days. He gave a brother back to a family, if only for a while. Mason took a walk to the park that evening, found a bench that faced nothing but trees, sat in silence. A kid passed with a football, laughed like he hadn't tasted bitterness yet. Mason smiled slightly, not because he wanted to, but because something cracked loose for a moment. The past didn't disappear, but for 5 seconds, it sat quiet. The fourth time he went, he finally spoke. "Name's Mason," he said. A few heads turned. One guy nodded. "Quinn, right? Navy Cross?" Mason exhaled slowly. "Yeah." Someone muttered, "It's about time you showed up." And they all laughed. The kind of laugh that means you're one of us. Mason smiled. Not wide, but real. It had been years since he felt that. He still had bad nights. Still woke with clenched fists and sweat-soaked shirts. But the difference now was this. When the ghosts came, they didn't sit alone. Other men carried their own. And sometimes they shared the weight. That made all the difference. He wasn't healed, but he wasn't invisible anymore. He had a name again, and others remembered it. Judge Malcolm Palmer had presided over thousands of cases. Armed robbers, drunk drivers, broken men with broken stories. But none had shaken him like the day Mason Quinn stood before his bench. That name had crashed through years of silence, like a rifle crack. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud since the day his brother was lowered into the earth. He hadn't recognized Mason by sight. Time had stolen too much. But the voice, the posture, even through the weight of years, there was something unmistakably Marine in how Quinn carried himself. Quiet, alert, ready, not defeated, just weathered. Malcolm had seen a lot of defendants, but only one ever made the courtroom fall completely, hauntingly, still. After the courtroom clear, he sat alone in his chambers. No robe, just a man at a desk. The photograph was always there, tucked in the top drawer, his brother Kyle in dress blues. Smile full of hope. That smile had vanished when the letter came. ID, patrol gone wrong. The kind of death that sends silence through a family like a concussion wave. But Kyle hadn't died immediately. There were weeks between the firefight and the final moment. Weeks the family never expected to have. Malcolm remembered the call. He made it to Germany, the officer had said. He's holding on. Those weeks meant something. Time enough for letters, calls, last words. Those days were bought, not by luck, but by a man named Quinn. Kyle had mentioned Mason in his letters. Staff Sergeant Quinn, quiet, always watching the squad's flank, led with calm. Protected with fire. He dragged me out, Kyle had written. Didn't even think twice. Took a round to do it. But he never hesitated. That's the kind of man I follow anywhere. Malcolm had read those words so many times, they lived in his bones. When Kyle died, Malcolm went numb. The world didn't stop. Law school didn't wait. Judgeship didn't care. But the war left its mark anyway, in the way Malcolm sat straighter during veteran cases, in how he noticed combat boots on the courthouse benches, in how he watched homeless men pass his window, and wondered which one had once led platoons through hell. Over the years, he tried to find Mason. Quietly. Nothing official. No subpoenas. Just requests. Emails to old contacts. Letters to veteran groups. No one answered. It was like Quinn had vanished after his last tour. Malcolm began to think he'd never know if Kyle's rescuer had survived. He thought maybe the silence meant Mason had fallen somewhere far from home. And then, the courtroom. That voice, that name, that haunted weight in every step. Malcolm had been trained to remain composed. But he felt something crack that day. When Mason spoke, it wasn't just a name. It was a doorway back to a battlefield Malcolm had never seen but had lived in his mind every night for 20 years. That moment changed something in him. He didn't recuse himself because he felt something deeper than conflict. He felt duty, the kind that didn't fade with time. His job wasn't just law. That day, it was about restoring something that had been stolen recognition. Not just of medals, but of meaning. Mason Quinn didn't need charity. He needed truth spoken, where silence had ruled for too long. When the Marines entered the courtroom, Malcolm stood straighter than usual. He saw the shift in Mason's face. The hesitation, the disbelief, and then the steel, the reflex of a man who once stood between his brothers and death. That man still lived inside Quinn. The world had forgotten. But Malcolm made damn sure the court remembered. After the medal ceremony, he returned to chambers again. This time, he didn't sit behind the desk. He stood, staring out the window, hands in fists. He had watched grown men rise to salute someone they'd once stepped over in the street. And for the first time in his career, he had to fight tears. Not weakness, reverence. A kind of emotional gravity. His clerk entered. "Sir, press requests are flooding in." Malcolm nodded. "Let them flood. How should we respond?" "With silence," Malcolm replied. "This isn't a story for headlines. This is a story for memory." The clerk paused. "He changed the room, didn't he?" Malcolm turned slowly. "No, he didn't change it. He reminded it. There's a difference." That night, Malcolm visited his brother's grave. He hadn't gone in over a year. Too busy. Too guilty. But he stood before the stone, polished by time and rain, and placed one hand on it like he was steadying himself. "I found him," he said softly. "You were right. He was the best of us. I just wish we hadn't let him disappear." The graveyard was quiet. Just wind and trees and the sound of boots crunching gravel. Malcolm didn't say much more. Just stood there, shoulder tense, jaw set. A man of few words, trained to weigh every syllable. But some truths didn't need courtrooms or robes. Some truths only required two brothers, one living, one gone, and the silence that passed between them. Back in chambers, Malcolm opened the old file again. Mason's service record, the citations, the after-action report. He reread the Silver Star commendation. Then the letter from the Pentagon upgrading it to the Navy Cross. The intel had only recently been declassified. Enemy communications, intercepted years later, confirmed that Mason's actions disrupted a larger ambush meant to wipe out the convoy entirely. Malcolm couldn't stop thinking about it. One man's courage had reshaped the battlefield. But afterward, that man had been discharged, lost, buried in bureaucracy. "We tell kids about heroes in textbooks," he muttered. "But the real ones? They end up sleeping under bridges until someone remembers their name." He closed the file. Hard. Never again. Not on my watch. He started making calls. Quiet ones. The kind of calls men make when they're done waiting for permission. He contacted the Veterans Court Program Director, ordered a review of long-neglected files, pushed for funding reallocations. Veterans in the system would no longer be processed like burdens. They would be seen. Dignity didn't require a gavel. It required action. Malcolm also contacted a friend in the State Bar Association. "We're launching a mentorship program," he said. "Veteran lawyers pair with veteran defendants. No more rotations. No more ignored cases. We owe them more than handouts. We owe them presence." His friend agreed. They'd all seen too many men like Mason come through the system with paperwork but no face. He didn't tell Mason about these efforts. Not yet. Mason didn't need praise. He needed peace. Let the system work quietly this time. Let dignity arrive without speeches. Sometimes real honor was a thing you did when no one saw it. And Malcolm had seen too much done in silence. It was time the silence gave something back. A week later, Malcolm stepped into the same courtroom. Empty this time. No suits, no gavel, no gallery. Just wood, concrete, and memory. He sat on the bench, not behind it. Just sat like any man would, shoulders heavy, thoughts circling. The same room where Mason Quinn's name had awakened 20 years of silence. The same floor where men had stood in respect. He stared across the room to the defense table. Could almost see Mason sitting there again, quiet, unsure, unaware of the storm his name had unleashed. Malcolm imagined his brother sitting next to him. Kyle would have smiled. Would have stood first when the gallery rose. Would have said, "That man's a Marine." Malcolm felt that moment like it had just happened again. He pulled a worn notebook from his coat pocket. Kyle's field journal, retrieved years ago from a personal effects box. He flipped to a dog-eared page. It was written 2 days after the Fallujah firefight. Quinn didn't flinch. Mood like death didn't exist. I tried to wave him off. He ignored me. Dragged me like I weighed nothing. That man is different. Malcolm closed the book and held it in both hands. "You saw him for what he was," he said aloud. "I just wish the rest of us had done the same sooner." He stood slowly, walked to the front row bench, and sat where a Marine veteran had stood and shouted, "That's him." He remembered the look in Mason's eyes, shock mixed with disbelief. Truth is, the world doesn't know how to handle quiet men. Men who don't ask for praise. Who do their jobs, vanish, and carry their wounds in silence. Malcolm had spent years reading about war, studying systems of justice, quoting ethics. But that day, it wasn't the law that spoke loudest. It was memory, brotherhood, and a sense of unfinished debt. Later that afternoon, a call came in. Maddox. "He's settling in well," he said. "The apartment's clean. He's attending gatherings with other vets. Helping too." Malcolm smiled faintly. "He's finding his place," Maddox agreed. "We're not done yet. There's still work to do. Still more out there like him." Malcolm's voice dropped. "Then we keep going. This wasn't a favor. This was a beginning." Maddox mentioned something else. "He asked for a copy of Kyle's letters." Malcolm paused. "He did?" "Yeah." Said he wanted to read the words himself. Said he needed to know if he made a difference. Malcolm's throat tightened. "He did," he said firmly. "He gave us something we never expected time." Maddox didn't respond for a moment. "Then I'll deliver them." That night, Malcolm pulled out a box from his closet. Inside were all of Kyle's belongings that mattered. A medal, dog tags, photographs, and a piece of stone, a fragment from the patrol route where Kyle died. He kept it not as a reminder of death, but of the journey that led them there, of courage, of choices made without hesitation. He placed the letter bundle on top, sealed the box carefully, then wrote a single line on the outside. "For the man who brought my brother home. He called Maddox again. "You'll deliver this personally," he said. "Don't ship it. It's not a package." "It's a memory," Maddox agreed. Some things deserve to be handed from man to man, no middlemen. 2 days later, Malcolm received an envelope in return. No stamp, hand-delivered. Inside was a single note. Mason's handwriting, sharp, exact, military. "I didn't think I needed to read them. Turns out I did. He spoke about you like you were his compass. I understand that now. I carried him out of the fire. You carried him through the rest." Malcolm folded the note slowly, sat back in his chair. The words hit harder than expected. They weren't poetic. They were precise, simple, like a field report. But beneath them lived the deepest kind of understanding, shared grief, shared honor. The knowledge that two men had carried different halves of the same burden, one through battle, the other through loss. He made one more call that evening. To the Department of Veterans Affairs. I want his reassessment fast-tracked. The voice on the other end hesitated. "It's already underway." "Not good enough," Malcolm said. "His service file doesn't just belong in records. It belongs in training. New judges, officers, anyone handling veteran cases, they need to know this name. They need to know what forgetting costs." They agreed. Bureaucracy moved slowly. But momentum had shifted. Mason's story, once buried in classified files, was now part of something wider. Not sensationalized, not exploited, but preserved. Truth doesn't need embellishment, just a voice. Just space. Malcolm made sure the right men heard it. Men who still had the power to make sure this never happened again. The courthouse cafeteria was quiet the next morning. Malcolm sat with 2 fellow judges, both former Navy. He told them the story, start to finish. No drama, just detail. They listened. One of them said quietly, "I think I processed Quinn in a drug case back in '09. Malcolm stared. "Did you know it was him?" "No," the judge whispered. "I didn't ask." That hit hard. He stood up, walked to the law library, opened the ethics code he'd read 1,000 times, found nothing about memory, nothing about obligation to honor, just policy, procedure, rules. But he wrote a note and left it taped to the front desk. A Marine's name isn't a formality. If you hear one in your courtroom, ask. That was all it said. He returned to chambers, stared at the court seal above the bench. Most days, it felt cold. But today, it looked like something worth defending again, because it had finally done something right. Not because the law demanded it, but because a man's actions deserve more than silence. Mason didn't need defense. He needed someone to finally listen. Malcolm planned one more visit to the apartment. Not to interfere, just to shake a hand. Just to look a man in the eye who had saved his brother's life and been repaid with silence. He had spoken about no man left behind. And now, finally, someone had come back for him. That mattered. That was justice, the kind no gavel can deliver. He knocked on the door. Mason opened it, quiet as ever. "Judge," he said. "Just Malcolm," he replied. Mason nodded. No tension, no formality. Just 2 men, bound by memory and fire. Malcolm extended his hand. "Thank you." Mason took it, gripped firmly. "Wasn't just me out there," he replied. "Always more names than medals." "Still," Malcolm said, "some names deserve to be remembered longer." They said nothing when Mason entered the room. No claps. No words. Just nods. Slow. Measured. The kind only men who've seen fire exchange. He paused at the doorway. Stared at the half-circle of chairs filled by men of all ages. Boots scuffed, jackets faded, expressions unreadable. This wasn't therapy. It was ground zero for men who never stopped serving. It wasn't his first meeting, but today was different. They knew now. Word had spread quietly. The man who saved 6 Marines under fire. The man who disappeared after discharge. The man who was court-martialed by life, not the Corps. Some of them had served under him. Others had served beside ghosts just like him. Every one of them understood. An older man stood first, white beard, Stiff walk. Army Ranger. Sergeant Quinn, he said, voice low but firm. There's a seat here for you. Mason nodded once, sat without a word. That was enough. In this room, presence meant more than speeches. These men had nothing to prove, only pain to share in silence and respect to give where earned. The air held stories unspoken. You could feel it in the posture, the limp that no longer needed explaining. The tattoo covered by long sleeves, the coffee never finished. Mason sat back, let his breath settle. Around him were men who'd walked through desert sun, jungle rot, mountain frost, different wars, same ghosts, same rules. Don't brag, don't beg, don't break. Cole sat beside him, the neighbor with the prosthetic. He leaned in slightly. You good? Mason nodded. Better now. Cole didn't press. Just handed him a slip of paper. It was a name. A kid 25, just back from Kabul, sleeping in his truck 2 towns over. Mason folded the paper and slid it into his pocket. That's how it worked now. No programs, no bureaucracy, just boots on the ground. If one man falls, another shows up. No fanfare, no cameras. Just quiet aid. Mason knew the drill. This was how honor lived outside of uniforms, by checking on each other, by handing off sandwiches, jackets, names of brothers who hadn't found their way back home yet, one name at a time. That night, Mason rode the train 2 towns south, found the truck behind an abandoned mall. Kid was in the driver's seat. Hoodie pulled up, dog tag swinging from the rear view. Mason tapped once on the glass. No surprise in the kid's eyes. Just the look of someone too tired to fight anymore. Cole sent me, Mason said. Room at my place. The kid didn't answer, just nodded, grabbed his pack. No questions. They didn't need names yet. Brotherhood came first. Mason led him back, one step at a time, like he had on patrols, like he had in the alleys of Baghdad. Sometimes bringing someone home didn't require anything more than presence. That was the difference between memory and erasure. When they returned, the apartment was quiet. Mason handed the kid a blanket and a mug of water. No speeches, just space. The kid didn't ask about the Navy Cross. Didn't need to. He recognized the stare, the hands that had patched wounds under mortar fire, the boots that still carried every step like it might be his last. Real recognizes real. The next morning, Mason found a note on the table. Didn't think anyone still cared. Thanks. It wasn't signed. Didn't have to be. Some men say more in one line than others do in a lifetime. Mason kept the note, folded it tight, placed it beside his field journal. It was another reminder. Someone else got one more morning because he showed up. Back at the vet center, Cole smiled when he saw Mason again. You found him? Yeah, Mason said. He's on his feet. Cole nodded once. Nothing more needed. In that space, each win, no matter how small, was a battle survived. No man needed a parade. Just a bed, a phone call, a nod from someone who knew the weight of silence. Word spread. More came. Not to worship Mason, but to stand beside him. Marines, soldiers, corpsmen, men with scars that never made it into files. One by one, they started to show up at his door. Some just needed someone to listen. Others needed help with via form some needed coffee. Mason didn't flinch. Didn't turn anyone away. He knew what it meant to be forgotten. The judge visited once more, in plain clothes. Brought with him another man, Gunnery Sergeant Wilkes. He was with your brother, the judge said. Wilkes stepped forward. You carried him out, he said. I saw it. I never forgot. Mason stood quiet. No words, just respect. Wilkes placed a challenge coin in Mason's palm. This is from the unit. You earned it, twice. It wasn't ceremony. It was sacred. One coin, one hand on the shoulder. It meant more than ribbons. These were men who bled and buried too many friends to waste time with empty praise. Mason didn't smile. He didn't need to. He understood the language, and in that moment, he wasn't a ghost anymore. He was part of something again. The prosecutor from the trial sent a letter, handwritten, apology, gratitude, no excuses. "I failed to look beyond the file," he wrote. "You taught me to see the man behind the case number. That will never happen again." Mason read it once, folded it, filed it next to his discharge papers, not for validation, but for closure. Even warriors need the final word. Soon, a mural appeared in the city square, commissioned by the local Vets Council. It didn't show Mason's face, just boots, a helmet, a folded flag, and one line beneath it, "No man left behind, not while we breathe." Mason visited it at night, stood before it silently, not in pride, in reverence. It wasn't for him. It was for them all. A boy approached him at the mural, maybe 10, holding his grandfather's hand. "That's about the Marines, right?" he asked. Mason nodded. "Yes, it is." The boy stared up. "Were you one?" Mason nodded again. "Still am." The old man smiled faintly. "Some things never stop," Mason replied quietly. "That's the point." They saluted, brief, but the kind that sticks to memory. Back at his apartment, Mason began framing more than just medals. He hung up letters, photos returned from storage, field notes, even the folded corner of the unit's flag. It wasn't about decoration. It was about restoring presence, proof that his life hadn't vanished into smoke, that names matter, that someone once believed in him, and that belief never really died. One morning, a brown envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a black and white photograph. Mason and his squad crouched behind a Humvee, covered in dust, eyes alert, faces young. He hadn't seen that photo since '04. Scrawled on the back were 2 words, "Still with you," no signature. But he knew who sent it. You don't forget the look in a brother's eyes. He added the photo to the wall, not because he needed decoration, but because the memories deserved a place of honor. These weren't ghosts. They were pieces of a man still standing. Every face had carried him at some point. Every name whispered back when silence got too loud. Mason didn't worship them. He remembered them. And that was enough. The next meeting at the vet hall was packed. More chairs. More boots. A few familiar uniforms folded neatly over tattooed arms. Mason sat near the back, like always, observing, listening. A young Marine stood up for the first time. "I didn't think I belonged here," he said, "but my sergeant told me. There's always a seat for a brother." Every man nodded. That's how the gatherings grew. Not with rules. Not with invitations. Just by presence. Word passed from one tired soul to another. Men who hadn't spoken in years started showing up, sharing stories, passing tools, fixing each other's trucks, watching ball games in silence. Not all healing comes through therapy. Sometimes it shows up in a worn toolbox and shared coffee. The city noticed, quietly at first. Cafe owners gave free meals without asking. Mechanics offered labor on busted cars for free. Barber shops gave haircuts with nods instead of words. No fanfare, just a silent kind of respect. The kind born from knowing a man once stood between danger and safety, and that kind of courage never expires. One day, Mason received a call from the Marine Corps League. They were organizing a remembrance event. Names etched into stone, new additions, forgotten ones. They wanted him there, not as a speaker, but as someone whose presence reminded others that valor doesn't vanish when the uniform is packed away. He said yes, not for himself, for the men still missing. At the event, Mason stood in the back row, dressed in a clean jacket, no ribbons, just boots, jeans, and that quiet posture of someone watching over others. One by one, names were read. And when they reached Kyle Palmer's, Mason's shoulders lifted slightly, not out of pride, but duty. A man saved is a man remembered, and he would never forget. After the ceremony, a corpsman approached him. "Sir, my father served with you." Mason raised an eyebrow. "He said you pulled him out under fire in '91. said you took shrapnel to the arm and didn't mention it until hours later. Mason chuckled once. Sounds about right. The corpsman extended his hand. He told me if I ever met you, I owed you everything. The gesture wasn't loud, but it shook Mason to the core. Years of silence had never erased that moment. Somewhere, that kid had grown up hearing about a nameless sergeant who didn't walk away. Now here he stood, not forgotten, not erased. Mason gripped the corpsman's hand. You owe me nothing, he said. We just did our job. That's what matters. A few weeks later, the judge called. There's someone else you should meet. His name was Rollins. A Marine recently released after discharge. No home, no help. Mason met him at the shelter. The kid had Quinn's eyes from 30 years ago. Confused, sharp, trying not to look desperate. Mason sat beside him. Didn't preach. Just offered a place to stay. That became the rhythm. One man at a time. No savior complex. No speeches. Just doing what he wished someone had done for him years earlier. Mason's apartment turned into a way station. Not permanent. Just enough to get men through the cold nights. The program started unofficial. Grew quietly. Vets helping vets. A rotating roof. A couch with dignity. One name at a time. The mayor eventually heard about it. Offered city support. Mason refused. We don't need politics, he said. Just boots and blankets. But they compromised. Funding came quietly. No press. No ribbon cutting. Just supplies. Showers. A shed of donated gear. That's how Mason liked it. No one asked for medals. They asked for warmth. That's the currency he understood best. One cold night, Mason sat with 4 other men around a space heater in the shelter's garage. One of them asked, Why do you still wear the boots? Mason looked down. Scuffed, old, same pair for years. They've walked through a lot, he said. And they never gave up on me, so I don't give up on them. They all nodded. Someone else passed him a flask. He declined. I've walked that road too, he said. Didn't like where it ended. No judgment in his voice. Just memory. The kind of memory that builds fences around bad choices. The other men respected it. Passed the flask without pressure. In that room, sobriety wasn't weakness. It was survival. Just another battle fought quietly. The next morning, Mason walked to the mural again. There was a small wreath now. Someone had added dog tags. Another had taped a note that said, My uncle served with you. He said you were the real deal. Mason stood there for a long time. He wasn't crying, but his breath came slower. The kind of breath men take when remembering everything. The vet gathering started bringing food. Men who had nothing sharing with others who had less. One guy donated a stack of clean socks. Another, spare keys to a used truck. No one wanted attention. They just wanted the matter again. And in those rooms, they did. Mason didn't lead. He anchored. Like a compass built from steel and scars. One evening, Cole stood and read a letter. This came from a guy who stayed here last winter. Said he got clean, got a job. Started talking to his son again. Sighed, and I quote, Tell the quiet guy with the stare that I didn't jump, because he gave me soup and didn't ask for anything back. The room went silent. Mason said nothing. He didn't have to. They all stood. No orders. No applause. Just stood. One by one, they placed a hand on Mason's shoulder as they left. Some saluted. Some nodded. Some simply looked him in the eye. Mason didn't break. But he felt it. That rare kind of acknowledgement that comes not from medals, but from men who bled, healed, and survived in silence. That night, he added nothing to the wall. He just sat and remembered. Mason sat alone in his apartment, an old field report in one hand and a folded photograph in the other. It was a shot of Kyle Palmer, young, squared away, clean cut, all fire in his eyes. Mason had carried this photo in his wallet until it disintegrated. Now, thanks to the judge, a clean copy sat in his lap again. Kyle's letters had arrived days earlier, handwritten, preserved by Malcolm, boxed up like sacred memory. Mason hadn't opened them immediately. Something about the weight of another man's words made his hands shake. He'd spent years burying names. Reading Kyle's voice on the page brought it all back. The sand, the gunfire, the urgency of dragging a dying man to safety. He finally opened the top letter. The first words hit like a punch. To my brother, tell Mom I'm okay. I'm with good men. That phrase echoed in Mason's head. I'm with good men. It reminded him of his own squads. The brothers who watched his back while the world collapsed around them. He missed that feeling of belonging, of trust. Kyle wrote about chow halls, about patrols, about the grit between his teeth after a dust storm. Then one page changed tone. Yesterday, we got hit outside Fallujah. I got caught in the open. Should have died. But a Staff Sergeant Quinn grabbed me. No hesitation. He dragged me like I was his kid. Covered me while the others pulled back. Mason stopped reading. He closed the page and sat in silence. That firefight lived behind his eyes like a permanent scar. He remembered Kyle's weight. Remembered his blood soaking into Mason's sleeve. Remembered Kyle whispering, "Get the others," even as his leg poured red into the gravel. Mason hadn't listened. He got him out, then screamed for the others to fall back. The second letter came from the hospital in Germany. I'm stable. The docs say I'll walk again. I owe Quinn everything. The guy's a ghost. Doesn't talk much. Just watches. He's always watching. He kept me alive, and I didn't even know his first name. Mason smirked faintly. That sounded like him. No fanfare. Just fire and follow through. No one needed to know. But the last letter, that one broke something. Written just before Kyle returned to active duty. They're letting me lead again. My CO asked if I was ready. I said if I'm even half the Marine Quinn is, I'll be fine. He changed me, even if he doesn't know it. He made me want to be someone worth following. Mason clenched the letter hard enough to bend the paper. He thought about those words for hours. The man he saved didn't just survive. He grew, lit, inspired. For years, Mason believed dragging Kyle from that kill zone only delayed the inevitable. But these letters told another story. His actions had meaning. They gave Kyle time to become more than just a casualty. Time to leave behind purpose. Mason took out his field journal, flipped to the back, wrote one line in sharp, pressed letters. He lived well because I carried him, and now I carry his name. He closed the book. That line didn't feel like therapy. It felt like truth. A burden shared. Not erased, but lifted enough for breath. And breath was something Mason hadn't taken freely in years. He called the judge that afternoon. Got the letters, he said. Read 'em all. Malcolm's voice cracked faintly. I'm glad. Mason didn't say thanks. He said, they mattered. Malcolm understood. He talked about you like a legend. Mason replied, he was the one who mattered. I just did what Marines do. Malcolm paused. You gave us something we didn't think we'd get: time. The silence between them held weight, not regret, not guilt. Just mutual understanding. Two men connected by someone gone. Two men trying to do right by a memory. Mason finally asked, why'd you keep searching for me? Malcolm answered simply, because my brother wouldn't shut up about you. That made Mason laugh for the first time in weeks. A short, quiet laugh. The judge continued, he called you the spine of the squad. Said you didn't blink when bullets started flying. You wanted to be like you. I think he was. Mason swallowed the lump in his throat. He was better. Malcolm replied, he said the same thing about you. Then they both let the silence settle, like two Marines sitting in a foxhole of memory. That evening, Mason revisited his wall, rearranged the medals, added Kyle's photo beside the Navy Cross, not to claim the moment, but to share it. Because none of this had ever been about individual glory. It had always been about men who stood for each other. Mason wasn't alone in that firefight. And he wouldn't be alone now either. He wrote a new entry in his journal, titled it for Kyle. It wasn't long, just a few lines. You went back out there when you didn't have to. That's what leadership looks like. You lived a creed, and when the world forgot, your brother remembered. Because of that, I got to remember who I was too. It was the only entry he didn't date. The next morning, Mason woke before the sun. No alarm. Just habit. Same routine from decades past. Boots first, then coffee, then silence. He sat at the window, watching the streetlights flicker. In the corner, Kyle's photo looked back at him from the wall. A quiet reminder, not of loss, but of weight. The kind that never leaves a man's shoulders. He thought about writing again, but didn't. Instead, he just listened to the radiator clicking, to the hum of the city waking up. Some mornings, the quiet was louder than any memory. He could still hear the firefight, still feel Kyle's blood cooling against his sleeve, still taste sand. But for once, the memory didn't punch him in the chest. It just sat with him. There was a knock at the door. Maddox, sharp suit, tired eyes. "Got something for you?" he said. He handed Mason a binder, thick, marked Veteran Case Initiative. Inside were names, photos, notes, all men like Mason, forgotten by the system, abandoned by paperwork. "These are your brothers," Maddox said. "You're not the only one." Not even close. Mason flipped through it slowly. Faces stared back. Some young, some old, all tired. "What am I supposed to do with this?" he asked. Maddox replied, "Whatever you think is right." Mason stared at the pages, then nodded. "Start with the oldest. The ones who've waited longest." Maddox smiled faintly. "Knew you'd say that." He left without another word. That week, Mason visited 3 men, one in a motel room, one in the back of a church, one beneath an overpass. Each time, he introduced himself simply. "Name's Mason Quinn. Just checking in." He didn't offer lectures, just presence. Helped one fill out VA forms, drove another to his medical appointment, sat with the third through the coldest night of the month. He came back each time quieter, not drained focus. These were his people, his war, his watch. The job wasn't over just because his discharge papers were signed. Being a Marine wasn't a uniform. It was a decision. Every day. Every man carried that creed or dropped it. Mason had dropped it once. Now, he was lifting it again. For others. Word spread in quiet circles. Not online. Not in newspapers. Just in conversations behind shelters. "You seen Quinn? He got Reynolds housing. Helped Mac with his appeal. Pulled Simmons out of that bottle." Soon, veterans started calling him Staff again, like the old days. Not sarcastic. Not for show. Just respect. Earned, not demanded. Brotherhood doesn't die. It just forgets how to speak. The judge called again. "We're naming the new program after him." Mason said no. "Don't put my name on it. Put his." "Kyle?" Malcolm asked. "No," Mason said. "All of them. Call it No Man Left Behind." "That's enough," Malcolm agreed. The name fit. It wasn't about medals. It was about promises, kept or broken. That line would live longer than any plaque. A younger Marine from the gathering approached Mason one night, shaky hands, didn't speak for a full minute, then said, "I didn't think anyone remembered guys like me." Mason didn't answer. Just handed him a cup of coffee, sat beside him. And that was it. No speeches, just a man saying without saying, "You're seen. You matter. You're not forgotten anymore." That Marine came back the next week. This time he spoke first. "Can I help?" Mason nodded. "You just did." The cycle had begun again. One brother carried, then became the one who carried others. That was the mission. That was the fight now. No bullets, no brass. Just men reaching into the darkness to make sure no one stayed lost in it. One afternoon, Mason found himself sitting at Kyle's grave again, just like the judge had months earlier. He didn't bring flowers, just his field journal. He read from the latest entry. "Still on watch," it said. "Still standing. You went first. I followed, not into death, but into duty." He placed the journal beside the stone, left it there. It belonged to both of them now. He stepped back, looked at the name, thought about how young Kyle was, thought about how unfair the war had been. But then he thought about how many people Kyle's letters had reached, how his courage shaped everything Mason had done since that courtroom. Kyle hadn't just been a casualty. He'd been a compass. Even in death, he pointed others home. A memorial ride was organized that month. No sponsors, just bikes. Dozens of veterans rolled through the city. Quiet procession, no shouting, no music, just engines and flags. Mason didn't ride. He walked beside them. Boots hitting pavement like the march of memory. One vet passed him and nodded. That guy's the reason we're here. Mason didn't look away, just nodded back. That night, Mason sat by the mural. Same spot, cold air. Same words beneath the boots and helmet. No man left behind, not while we breathe. Someone had added chalk names around the bottom. Men lost the war. Men lost after. Mason stared at them. Then added one name himself. Not Kyle's, his own. Because he wasn't lost anymore. The judge visited again. Quiet visit? They didn't talk long. Just exchanged stories. At one point, Malcolm said, "You were the man I wanted to be when I put on the robe." Mason looked at him. "Then wear it like Kyle would have expected." Malcolm nodded. "I do now." Two men, one wearing justice, the other wearing every memory stitched into his spine. Mason ended that week at the gathering again. Cole brought in a new guy. Quiet, heavy stare, still fresh from the war. Mason stood, extended his hand. "Name's Mason. You're in the right place." The man looked at him, unsure. "What if I don't belong?" Mason smiled faintly. "You made it through. That's all the proof you need." The circle opened. Another seat was filled. That night, Mason wrote again. This one he didn't read aloud, just folded it, sealed it, marked it, "For when I'm gone." Inside, it said, "Don't make this about me. Make it about all of us. Stand for the next man like you stood for me. Remember names. Speak them out loud. Give others the time we weren't promised. That's the mission now. Semper Fi." The snow fell heavy that morning. Thick flakes. Slow descent. The kind of silence that covered everything. Mason Quinn stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching the city turn white. It reminded him of the desert, how silence could scream, how stillness could feel like a breath held too long. But this time, the quiet didn't bring war. It brought peace. His boots were lined by the door, worn but still standing. The Navy Cross hung beside the frame. Above it, the photograph of Kyle Palmer. Below, the framed challenge coin from the unit. It wasn't a shrine. It was a declaration. A man lived here. A man remembered others. Mason didn't see a hero when he looked at it. He saw duty. There were no headlines, no awards, just appointments. Follow-ups, check-ins, men still called. Some knocked on his door. Some just left letters outside, folded once, taped with old bandages, sealed with silence. Mason read every one. None asked for help. All said the same thing in different ways. You showed up when no one else did. That was the legacy. That day he visited the shelter again. No reason, just instinct. He brought thermal socks, a crate of MREs, and 2 patch coats. Nobody asked where he got them. He handed them off and kept moving. He wasn't trying to save anyone. He just knew what it felt like to sleep with frozen hands. No man should be invisible while still breathing. At the back of the building, a younger Marine stood smoking. Nervous energy. Couldn't keep still. "You Quinn?" Mason nodded. "Heard about you," the kid said. "They say you show up when it counts." Mason looked him over. Not in judgment, in recognition. "That's the job," he said. The kid nodded. Didn't say thank you. Just dropped the cigarette and crushed it with his boot. Later, Mason sat at the vet center, a round table. Folding chairs, men from different decades. One guy limped from Korea. Another shook from Bosnia. Someone new asked, "What's the point of coming here every week?" Mason looked at him, not unkindly. "So we don't forget how to speak." The new guy blinked. then nodded. Makes sense. The room exhaled together. Back at the apartment, he received a call. A quiet voice. One of the old squad. You still around? Mason replied, still breathing. The voice cracked. Needed to hear that. Mason paused. You okay? Getting there, the voice said. You? Mason looked around. The apartment, the medals, the journal. I'm not lost anymore, he said. I'm where I'm supposed to be. That night, he wrote again. Entry was short. Sometimes the mission isn't to save. Sometimes it's to stay, to remain. So others know they can too. He closed the book, looked at his hands. Scarred, stiff, still strong. They had pulled men from fire, held rifles, held trembling shoulders. Now they held pens. Mason smiled faintly. Some weapons saved lives without ever being fired. There was a knock the next morning. Not urgent, not soft. He opened the door to find a Marine in dress blues, clean-shaven, eyes firm. Sir, I'm Corporal Raines. I was told to deliver this personally. He handed over a plaque. Mason read it slowly. For those who carried others through darkness. No name, just those words. He nodded once. No speeches, just truth. Raines saluted. Sir, it's an honor. Mason returned it without hesitation. It's not about honor, he said. It's about not quitting. Raines held the salute for a second longer, then turned and left. Mason stared at the plaque again. Quiet recognition. No flash, no cameras. Just acknowledgement from one man to another. That's the kind that lasts longer than brass or marble. At the mural that week, new names had been added. Chalk had washed away in the rain, but someone came back and redrew everyone. Underneath, a new message appeared, carried home by brothers who didn't forget. Mason stood before it, boots planted. Men walked past, nodded, saluted, kept walking. Mason stayed a little longer, said each name aloud. Just once. A local school reached out. Teacher, a former infantryman, asked if Mason would speak to the class. Just tell them what honor really means, he said. Mason agreed, but only if he could bring others. When the day came, 5 veterans stood in front of 30 students. Mason didn't speak first. He let others go. Then he stood, cleared his throat. I'm not here to talk about war, he said. I'm here to talk about promises, the ones you make when no one's watching. The ones you keep even when no one thanks you. That's what makes a man. The room was still. A few boys sat straighter. A few looked down. All of them heard it. That's all Mason wanted. Afterward, a student approached. Sir, were you really homeless once? Mason nodded. Wasn't the worst part. What was? The boy asked. Mason didn't hesitate. Being forgotten. The boy swallowed hard. I won't forget. Mason nodded again. That was enough. One promise from one young voice. That's how change begins. Not with speeches, with memory, with the simple act of not looking away. Mason returned home that evening to find a package on the stoop. No name, no note. Inside, a photo. It showed him standing beside Kyle Palmer years ago. Neither of them remembered the moment. Someone else had taken it. A day before the mission. A lifetime ago. On the back, you both made it out. Just in different ways. He placed that photo beside the others. The wall now told a story, not of heroism, but of presence. Men who stood. Men who fell. Men who remembered. No explanations. No slogans. Just a life lived by the code. No man left behind. And for the first time, Mason allowed himself to believe. Maybe someone had come back for him too. Snow continued to fall outside Mason's apartment, dusting the sidewalk in silence. Inside, the heat ticked through old pipes. Mason sat by the window, not watching the street but listening to the weight of the room. His journal lay open, pen resting on a blank page. He wasn't writing today. Today he was just breathing. For once, that was enough. The phone buzzed. A message from Cole. New guy coming in tonight. Name's Torres. Rough shape. You couldn't take him in. Mason typed back one word, always. No hesitation. No need for details. Another name. Another brother. Another chance to make sure someone didn't vanish. That was how the mission worked now, passed quietly from hand to hand. That evening, Torres arrived. Looked 25. Eyes older than war. Didn't speak. Just nodded. Mason handed him a warm hoodie and a pair of dry boots. No questions. No judgment. He knew better. The first gift a man like Torres needs is space, to be, to exist, to not explain. Mason offered that without asking. Torres took a seat by the heater. They didn't talk until the coffee burned low. Torres finally broke the silence. They told me you save people. Mason stared at the steam rising. I showed up. That's what mattered. Torres looked down. No one ever did that for me. Mason didn't flinch. They will now. And in that moment, the torch passed again, from survivor to survivor. A few days later, a ceremony was held at the Veterans Hall. Not flashy, just quiet. Plaques were mounted. One read, Staff Sergeant Mason Quinn, for showing up when others forgot. Mason didn't attend. He stayed at the apartment, not out of humility, out of principle. It's not about me, he told Cole. It's about all the ones who didn't make it. Instead, he spent that evening helping Torres find a job application. Sat beside him while he filled it out, slow hands trembling from years of anxiety. When it was done, Torres exhaled like he'd just crossed a battlefield. I don't think I can do this. Mason looked him straight in the eye. You've already done harder. You're just remembering how. A knock came that night. The judge stood at the door, holding a small frame. Thought you'd want this, he said. Inside, Kyle's last commendation, the one Mason never saw. Signed by the battalion CO, exemplary leadership under pressure. Inspired by the actions of Staff Sergeant M. Quinn, Mason didn't speak. Just took it gently. His hands didn't shake this time. The judge sat beside him. They said nothing for a while. Just stared at the wall of names, medals, and folded stories. Finally, Malcolm said, he wouldn't have lasted those weeks without you. Mason nodded. I wouldn't have lasted these years without him. 2 brothers. One lost to war. The other still walking wounded, but neither forgotten. That's what memory is for. Mason later mailed a letter, addressed to the Marine Corps League, inside his own Silver Star citation. With it, a note. Pass this to someone who thinks they're invisible. Make sure it reminds them who they are. No return address, just initials. The medal would travel again, from man to man. A piece of truth, not decoration. Honor is only real when shared. That winter, 4 more veterans cycled through his apartment. 2 found jobs. 1 reunited with his brother. Another enrolled in community college. Mason didn't ask about outcomes. He just made sure they had shelter when it counted. The ones who stayed longest helped repair the plumbing. 1 rewired the heater. Brotherhood, lives, and actions, not apologies. And Mason never asked for more than presence. Torres stayed the longest. By spring, he was volunteering at the shelter. He never talked about what happened overseas. But he always stood next to newcomers. Always handed out the first blanket. One morning, he asked Mason, "You ever think about stopping?" Mason shook his head. "You stop when the last one's found." Torres nodded. "Then I'm with you." That was enough. The city created a program inspired by the No Man Left Behind Circle. Not a copy, a signal boost. Mason agreed on one condition. Keep the names off the signs. Don't make it about me. The mayor agreed. No ribbons, no parades. Just resources, beds, blankets, funding, quiet dignity. It wasn't about recognition. It was about redemption for a system that had once failed. On the anniversary of the courtroom hearing, the judge invited Mason back, not to be honored, to speak to a new group of law clerks. Tell them what the files don't show, he said. Mason stood before 20 young men. No podium, just boots, jeans, a quiet voice. A name in a file isn't just a defendant. Sometimes it's a war hero sleeping on concrete. He told them about memory, about Kyle, about the silence that nearly swallowed him. Then he looked each one of them in the eye. You will be the last stop for some men. Don't miss who they are. Then he left. That was the speech. That was enough. The young men didn't clap, but some of them stood. And that was everything. Back home, Mason received another letter. No name, just 2 lines. My father told me stories about a Marine named Quinn. He was real, and he saved people. Mason folded the note, added it to the growing pile. The wall in his apartment now held no space between the names. They filled it edge to edge. The room itself had become memory. He didn't fear dying anymore, not because he wanted it, but because he knew he wouldn't vanish nameless. Someone would remember, someone would speak, someone would carry. That's all any Marine ever wanted. Not medals, not monuments. Just a promise kept. Mason had kept it. For Kyle, for the Corps, for the ones who came broken and left standing taller. One last time, he visited the mural. Chalk dust scattered by wind. A kid on a bike passed. "Hey," he said, "are you the guy that saved all those soldiers?" Mason turned. "No," he said. "They saved me." The kid tilted his head, confused. But Mason smiled. Some truths take years to understand. Some stories are bigger than heroes. Some names are never truly gone. That night, he added one final journal entry. The handwriting wasn't perfect. His hands ached. But he pressed every letter with the weight of 2 decades. No man left behind, not while we breathe. Not while we remember. I stood alone once, but not anymore. They stood for me. And I stand for them. Semper Fi. He signed it, folded the journal shut, placed it in the center of the wall. Then he stood.